I'll start from ideas. I have a little hypothesis that our ideas are essentially what's going to define us. And then the question is, where do ideas come from? They come from many places. We get inspired daily from people around us. We get inspired by books. We get inspired by poetry and cinema and theater. But a core component is, if we think about our own knowledge retrieval, is being able to access some of those memories. So I believe a big superpower for us going forward is to capture our ideas through writing. So writing holds this meta skill. I'll give you a quick insight in terms of what I've been inspired by. This is in 2023. Context was I had some tension noticing that a lot of the knowledge I had as a behavioral scientist was not practical in many different scenarios. And part of it came down to experiments. Experiments from a behavioral science perspective is very robust. It's very rigid. It could be called a diligent experiment. And something which I learned from baking, which I didn't know from behavioral science, was dynamic experiments are more helpful. So that took me down this journey of narrating the stories and lessons and inspirations that I've got from sourdough baking, which could be applied to business. And you'll see some of these insights, like the baker's goal is not scientific inquiry. There's also the idea that in an experiment, quite often we want to be quite diligent. We don't want to vary variables because we won't be able to test what created the change. But when you're baking, all you care about is having a good loaf, which people like to eat. I had this hot take. I'm not anti-goal setting, but goal setting is not always the most helpful exercise. And part of my worry came from what happens if we have this big life goal that we're working towards and we never achieve it. So for example, I have a life goal of becoming a writer. And what if I never become a writer? Will I just be left perpetually disappointed? I needed to be cautious about setting this goal that I need to give up everything else and become this writer. Part of it was inspired by this 2021 article in the Frontiers in Psychology. The data showed that if we fail to achieve a goal, so if we set a very specific life goal, like becoming a successful author, and if we fail to achieve that goal, then that impacts our self-esteem. It impacts our emotional well-being. That's what these two graphs show. The affect and our self-esteem go down when you fail to achieve that goal. And it also impacts your motivation to pursue goals in the future. So this one life goal is going to impact your other life goals as well. I believe we shouldn't be too ambitious. It's fine to be ambitious, but we shouldn't be anchored to an ambitious goal. There's the famous arrival fallacy. I think many of us encounter it. I'll be happy when I buy my dream house, or I'll be happy when I land my dream job. I've been a bit cautious about this arrival fallacy of I'll be happy when I become a full-time writer. It's quite hard to keep writing, and editing is never fun to do. There are drafts and drafts to edit. You send it to your editor, it comes back, and you have to do unlimited revisions and fight for creative autonomy, and many tensions come up, including marketing your book. So every author today is expected to market their own book by coming on podcasts and interviews, and quite often you might do 4 or 5 podcasts a day and for many, many hours, and you may not see the fruits of your time being paid off. There's also a risk of just turning into a narcissist because you get stuck in your own head. So I worry about all these reasons why I shouldn't go all into setting this big life goal of becoming a full-time writer. If you've come across Cal Newport, he has an amazing podcast called Deep Questions, and he's written books like Deep Work and Slow Productivity. He had spoken to Jim Collins, who's this author and former Stanford Business School. And Collins was all about iterative testing. He had this idea that all we need to do is just track our days, like are we having a positive day or a negative day? Take some notes and then make the changes that serve us. So what it would look like is you could take your notes app, an Excel spreadsheet. I like doing it in a physical journal, for example. And you create a 5-point scale, so +2 to -2, and you rate each day. Is it very positive? Is it positive? Is it meh? Is it negative or very negative? There's an optional to log your reflections to give you some more qualitative insight. What led to a positive day or what led to a negative day? So I had run this experiment myself, good old school pen and paper. You can see the N over there and the positive over there, 1 for a positive and a N for a neutral day. And I scribbled some notes in terms of what happened that day for me. And what I did notice, even before I was stressed out that I need to move my body, I need to walk, I was able to preempt when my day was going to turn from a +1 to a N. So it was quite empowering for me to go through this transformation of catching my thought patterns in real time and changing my behavior. So after that, I was quite inspired. Can I turn this into an app? I was inspired to then develop something on Claude Code. So I'll give a quick insight of what the app looks like. So that's Neuro Experiments. That's the app which I had created. Very simple in terms of functionality. You could do your reflections. So these are the questions based on observation, question, and hypotheses, 3 questions. And that's inspired by a book called Tiny Experiments. So I've included a book out here in case you're interested. But that whole principle of observing what's happening with us with curiosity, asking questions, and thinking like a scientist by designing experiments was one of the key features of the book Tiny Experiments. So you can start capturing your reflections. That essentially acts as your ideas, and I believe our ideas can unlock a lot. You can set up your experiment depending on your goal. I created some general categories. So there's health, productivity, learning, mindfulness, social, and other, which is a catch-all for other types of activities. So fairly broad. I'm going to select learning as my goal. So I might want to design an experimental title, reading, and then my implementation intentions. This is classic behavioral science, that getting someone to commit on when and where they're going to do the behavior means they're more likely to complete the behavior. So I will read every week, night. I won't be too ambitious. I'll start off maybe for 7 days. And that's one experiment that I can start. So when I'm happy with that, I can launch my experiment. And then you'll see it popped right over there. A little graph to show how far you're along the journey. I designed it specifically not about capturing whether you stick to your task or not stick to your task. It doesn't matter. These are experiments that you set for yourself. The whole idea is self-inquiry, to be curious. So for example, say I decide to abandon this reading experiment, I may hit end early. And now I might capture my reflections similar to how Jim Collins mentioned in the Cal Newport podcast. And I might put -1 because I was challenged by falling asleep instead of reading. So I might get some kind of indicator that maybe that's not the best time for me to do my reading. Maybe weeknights is not the best time. So it invites curiosity in that process. I've included some of my resources which I have out here. So I've been motivated by tiny experiments, deep questions. You would notice the language of future self in my prompts. So that's from Hal Hirschfield's book. And there's the classic fresh start effect from behavioral science.